Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Well, hello, everyone. It is a day of shockers. Yesterday was a day of shockers also. And I'm actually really excited about today's broadcast because I have in my hot little hands H.R. 4405, also known as the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Today, it's very short, believe it or not. It's 5.5 pages. Today, we are actually going to go through line by line some of the clauses in this act, because one of the things that happened to me last night after all the passages of this bill, we're going to talk more about that in a minute, was that there was an enormous number of posts on Blue Sky and elsewhere that completely falsely represented what this act actually requires the Attorney General to do, let alone how she could get out of it, okay? And because, I'm here to inform you all about the way the law works and what Epstein files are going to have to be released and what aren't and how all of this fits together, we're going to go through this in detail, because I honestly think that it's impossible, once you know what's actually in the bill itself, to be under any impression that the folks out there claiming that somehow she's going to get away with all of this, he's going to get away with all of this, to believe them. Okay? This bill is incredibly tightly written for a very good reason. All right. So let's go through what happened first. Shocker of all shockers. Okay. Now I have to tell you guys, I want to remind you, if you were here on Friday's broadcast, you know that as of Friday, like a scant 5 days from yesterday, John Thune said there was no way that the Epstein Files Transparency Act was ever going to get to the floor of the Senate. Yesterday, by an almost unanimous vote, one Clay Higgins voting against, the Epstein Files Transparency Act passed the House. It was promptly taken to the Senate, where Mike Johnson, while that was happening, was kind of having a bit of a fit. And we're going to talk about why in a minute, because it actually relates to the contents of the act, all right? He said that he had talked to the president, and while he was planning on voting for it, and in fact did, that there were all sorts of things in the act that he didn't like, that he thought innocent people were going to be wrapped up in it, that names were going to be disclosed, people's reputations would be ruined, blah, 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 blah. More on that in a minute. And so he said that he had talked to the Senate Majority Leader, and he had told John Thune that the bill should not pass in the Senate until certain alterations were made. Well, Chuck Schumer, who, if you've been here for a while, I'm not like the biggest fan of, Chuck Schumer had different ideas. And in fact, what happened was that the bill was brought to the floor of the Senate by Chuck Schumer, and invoking a particular part of the Senate rules was passed by unanimous consent in such a way that when it goes back to the House for final approval, it doesn't have to come back to the Senate again. And it passed unanimously in the Senate in the space of about 2 minutes. So we now have it passed the House by almost unanimous vote, passed the Senate by unanimous vote, heads back to the House and goes directly to Trump's desk for signature. 5 days ago, no one could have predicted that this was how this was going to go. All right. Now, the speed with which this has changed has given some people reason to be suspicious. And one of the things that I saw last night floating around on Blue Sky was, they wouldn't have voted for this so fast if the fix wasn't already in. Hold up. I had a moment this morning when I said on Blue Sky, we have to take the win. We actually have to take the win. If we don't take the win when it comes, there won't be more of them. I want to just make something very clear, okay? And there's new polling out this morning that reflects this. The outrage over the withholding of the Epstein files in the general public is overwhelming. Overwhelming. There's a new poll out this morning that says that 59% of the American public disapproves of Trump's handling of the Epstein files, that more than 70% of the public believe that there are things in the Epstein files that are damning to government officials. More than 60% of the American public, and again, this is Republicans and Democrats, believe that there are things in the Epstein files concerning Jeffrey Epstein's death that are being withheld from the general public. So this is not a situation where Democrats and Republicans are on opposite sides. The reality here is that the vast majority of the general public is crying out for these files to be released. And the GOP saw the writing on the wall. Trump saw the writing on the wall. This is the reason why yesterday and this morning and even over the weekend, he's been deflecting from this so much. This morning there was or maybe it was late last night, there was a post from him on Truth Social that said something like, I don't care how fast this passed the Senate. I want everybody to focus on what a great president I am, right? He knows that these files and what is in them could end his political career. That's the reason why he's trying to get people to stop talking about it. And the only way to get people to stop talking about it in his mind, this isn't going to work, was to endorse the passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act in the House, okay? And then this happened in the Senate, which nobody was expecting. Not Johnson, not the president, not anybody on the GOP side who decided to vote for it in the House, in short order, okay? So what has happened here is a huge victory, and not even just a victory for Democrats. In fact, the more significant victory here is for Epstein's victims, who literally for several decades have been trying to get the information about what Jeffrey Epstein did, the sweetheart plea deal that he got in Florida, what he was doing before that, what happened after that, his influence over this enormous body of very powerful, super wealthy men, right? All of this information out in the public. And, we talked about this a bit yesterday, but the press conference by the survivors yesterday on the steps of the Capitol leaned into this so hard. That accountability isn't just about criminal accountability. It's about those victims being believed. It's about the truth of what happened coming to light. It's about the men who were involved being held to account. Okay? So this is a huge victory. All right. Now, I want to talk, and I don't want anybody to deny it. That's the other thing I'm really struggling with here. We're coming off an enormous election victory, right? We've now had 2 enormous victories on the Epstein files in the last 24 hours. And on top of that, there's new polling this morning, don't get comfortable, that says that in a head-to-head mashup 2026 election with a generic ballot, Dems are up by 14 points nationwide. Okay? Don't get comfortable. We got a lot of work to do between now and next November. But all that said, there is an enormous amount of movement on this. Okay, so now the bill is sitting on Trump's desk, and I'm seeing here in the comments that while we're sitting here, sometimes this happens while I'm on the air. There's a Chiron on MS Now saying that they're waiting for Trump to sign the Epstein Files Transparency Act. So he's going to sign this thing, which will save us a little bit of a discussion about the pocket veto, but I'm going to tell you all about that anyway. Let's talk about that real quick, actually, before he signs it. So ordinarily, when a bill passes the House and the Senate, and it goes to the president's desk, the president has 10 days to sign it. And if he doesn't sign it, it becomes law. That's the way that it normally works. Okay. 10 days to sign, president doesn't sign it, it becomes law, automatic. Okay. There is something, however, it's sort of referred to as the pocket veto. And the way that that works is if the bill goes to the president's desk and he waits 10 days to sign it, or she or they wait 10 days to sign it, a person can hope. And the Congress is out of session when those 10 days expire, then the bill does not become law because Congress is out of session and can't be sent back down. So this is where we get the reference of what's called the pocket veto. One of the things, again, that the naysayers and the doomsayers and the cynics were saying last night is he's just going to sit on this until the House and the Senate are out of office for the Thanksgiving break. Then we have a pocket veto. We have to start all the way over from scratch. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. All right. So that's the pocket veto. Now, I want to talk through for a few minutes about what the act actually does, because this really matters a lot. Yesterday, and this included, by the way, some very big name commentators. I was really distressed to see this. Immediately after it passed the House, there were folks out there claiming that this new investigation that Trump just started into Clinton and Democrats and Epstein, such as it is, could prevent the Epstein files from being disclosed en masse. That is false. Let me say it again. That is False. If you were watching the broadcast on Monday, you already know this, but I'm going to tell you exactly how now. Okay, so we're going to go through this. I'm going to give you I'm going to put on my old Columbia Law School professor hat, and we're going to walk through this bill. Because when you know what's actually in it, and I'm going to explain to you some of the legalese so you understand it, you're going to understand exactly why Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, as the sponsors of this bill, and the people who they had drafting it, prepared for this exact possibility. All right. And it's really important that you read this bill. This is one reason why I decided to go through it today on the broadcast, because if you don't understand what it actually says, and if the people who you're taking information from have not read it, you could be under the impression that this investigation alone would be enough to stop it. All right. So here's what the bill says. And I'm going to go through this. Some of this I'm going to quote, and some of it I'm going to explain. Okay. First things first, timing. This is important. Not later than 30 days after the enactment of this act, that's when the president signs it, the Attorney General shall, subject to Section B, which is about redactions, make publicly available in a searchable and downloadable format, that's going to be fun for people like me, all unclassified records, documents, communications, and investigative materials in the possession of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation and United States Attorney's Office, that relate to, wait for it, an entire list of things. Here's the list. Jeffrey Epstein, including all investigations, prosecutions, or custodial matters. That includes everything all the way back to 2007. Ghislaine Maxwell. Flight logs or travel records, including but not limited to manifests, itineraries, pilot records, and customs or immigration documentation for any aircraft, vessel, or vehicle owned, operated, or used by Jeffrey Epstein or any related entity. Every single log for every jet. Every single log for every single vehicle. We're going to get all that. 4, we've already done 3. This is number 4. Individuals, including government officials, named or referenced in connection with Epstein's criminal activities, civil settlements, immunity or plea agreements, or investigatory proceedings. So anybody, any files they have on anybody who had anything to do with the investigations of Jeffrey Epstein, civil proceedings against Jeffrey Epstein by the victims, anything having to do with immunity agreements. Remember that crazy sweetheart deal that Alex Acosta cut with Epstein in the late aughts? Anybody having anything to do with that? Anything having to do with plea agreements? All of that is coming out. 5. Number 5. Entities, corporate, nonprofit, academic, or governmental, with known or alleged ties to Epstein's trafficking or financial networks. That includes banks. That part's going to be kind of fun because we're going to get to see who financed him, where and how, where the money was coming from, who got it, who was maintaining it, who was carrying on relationships with Epstein financially. Okay. 6, any immunity deals, non-prosecution agreements, plea bargains, or sealed settlements involving Epstein or his associates. So if they cut a deal with somebody in exchange for their testimony for Epstein, we're going to get that information. If they gave someone else a plea agreement in exchange for private information, we're going to see that. Okay. 7. This is one of my favorites, honestly. Internal DOJ communications, including emails, memos, meeting notes, concerning decisions to charge, not charge, investigate, or decline to investigate Epstein or his associates. So we're going to get all the internal documentation from the DOJ about why they made the decision to drop the charges against Epstein in 2007 and all the decisions about everything that went into his prosecution in 2019. 8, this list goes on. All communications, memoranda, directives, logs, or metadata, stick a pin in that because we're going to talk about that in a minute, concerning, wait for it, the destruction, deletion, alteration, misplacement, or concealment of documents, recordings, or electronic data related to Epstein, his associates, his detention and death, or any investigative files. Okay, here's why this matters. Because I know there's a lot of people who have read things in the last 24 hours that are like, the FBI blacked out Epstein's or Trump's name in every single Epstein file. I heard from Jeffrey Epstein's brother who told People magazine that he heard a rumor that in a facility in Winchester, Virginia, they're taking out every Republican name. First of all, I have to say something about that. Mark Epstein is not a reliable source. He's actually in the files that were released last week. Okay. He knew what his brother was doing people should really take a breath before they give credit to any single thing that he said. Okay, not a reliable witness, not somebody that I, as an attorney, would put on a stand and expect them to tell the truth. All right, so what this paragraph means, this is number 8, is that if they have done any damage of any kind to any of these records, they have to disclose that to Congress and the general public. Not just that, they have to disclose the metadata. And so what that means is that the record, now for the people who don't understand this, every document that's created anywhere electronically has something called metadata attached to it. It says things like, here's the date this document was created. Here's the dates this document was modified. Here are the people who logged in to do the modification on it, if it's like a shared document, okay? Here's the things that were changed, okay? Metadata is really fun if you're a litigating attorney because metadata gives away secrets. Metadata tells you who went into a given document and edited it. It tells you who logged in to look at a document at a given day and time, all right? So if they have done anything to any of these electronically stored documents, and again, I have to remind everybody here, you can go back and watch the broadcast from earlier in this week, none of these documents are in paper format. They cannot be shredded, they cannot be whiteouted, they cannot be hit with a magic marker. They are electronically stored documents, which means they have a metadata record attached to them every single time, all right? The metadata will have to be released for any document that they've done anything to, and as well as all communications, memoranda, directives from the DOJ about the review of these files. So, if you're looking at the reporting that's out there that says like 1,000 DOJ agents were tasked with logging every single place where Trump's name appeared, or there's like one article from Bloomberg that claims they were actually blacking out Republican names or Trump's name, if any of that is actually true, all the communications, memoranda, directives, logs, emails, phone records, text messages, instructions, all of that is going to be disclosed, all right? Plus the records of the modifications that were made, all right? 9, we're at the bottom of the list of what they have to disclose. Documentation of Epstein's detention or death, including incident reports, witness interviews, medical examiner files, autopsy reports, and written records detailing the circumstances and cause of death. Okay, you all know I'm not a conspiracy theorist here. The whole time that we've been talking about Epstein on this broadcast for many, many, many years now, I've told you all I think that he killed himself, okay? I'm going to wait for the evidence because, I'm an attorney. You all know this. I'm trained to look at evidence, all right? If the evidence shows something else, we're going to know that, okay? We're going to know it. All right, now we get to the part that has everybody all up in arms, right? Which claiming these crazy things about what Pam Bondi can do. Section B. Prohibited grounds for withholding. So these are the categories for which they can withhold documents, okay? Sit tight with me. 1, no record. Okay, this is prohibited. This is what they are not allowed to hold something back for. 1, no record shall be withheld, delayed, or redacted on the basis of embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity, including to any government official, public figure, or foreign dignitary. Okay, so here's what that means in plain language. They cannot withhold documents or redact documents on the basis of the fact that someone's name is in them who may suffer professional or personal reputational harm. Doesn't matter if you're Bill Clinton or Ehud Barak, whether you're like, Jeffrey Epstein's attorneys, Reed Weingarten's all over, the ones that were released last week, so is Alan Dershowitz, whether you're, a foreign official who did financial dealings with him, like MBS, none of that can be redacted. And if you happen to be Donald Trump, your name cannot be redacted or withheld on the basis that you may suffer reputational harm as a result of being associated with Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, so that is the basis for which you cannot withhold materials. Okay, permitted withholdings. Here we go. The Attorney General may withhold or redact the segregable, that's actually a word, portions of records that, now we have another list. A, contain personally identifiable information of victims or victims' personal and medical files and similar files, the disclosure of which would constitute a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. So we are not going to know the names of the victims, right? We are not going to know their medical histories, all right? Anything that would disclose the identities of the victims can be redacted, okay? Now, let me just say this. redacted, okay? It doesn't mean that you can withhold an entire document because the name of a victim is in there. You can black it out using electronic redaction software, but you are not allowed to withhold the whole document. Okay, B, this one's obvious. Depict or contain child sexual abuse materials, which is referred to as CSAM, if you've seen me use that language elsewhere, as defined under 18 U.S.C. 2256, that's a federal law, and prohibited under 18 U.S.C. 2252-2252A, also a federal law. So these are the federal laws that define what constitutes child sexual abuse material. We will not get that, okay? If there is a recording of an official raping a 13-year-old girl, we are not going to see it. It can be redacted by the Attorney General. All right. But wait, that's not the end of the story. So everybody sit tight. C, this is the one that's got everybody really up in arms. Would jeopardize an active federal investigation or ongoing prosecution. Now, everybody paying attention? I want your ears perked up right now. Provided that such withholding is narrowly tailored and temporary. Okay. This is the part that I think a lot of other commentators are not getting. All right. Let's just say hypothetically that the DOJ starts an investigation into whether Bill Clinton was engaged in sex trafficking with Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not saying he was, just throwing it out there because that's what the president has suggested. All right. What this means is that documents that relate to whether or not Bill Clinton did that can be redacted. It does not mean that documents related to whether or not Donald Trump did that can be redacted on that basis, or Les Wexner, or for that matter, like, Steve Bannon. Those materials cannot be redacted if there's not an ongoing federal investigation related to those men. So the key, and there's more about this in the bill. Sit with me. We're not done yet. We're not even close because there's backstop clauses to this particular one. What this means, okay, just so everybody gets it, is that they can only withhold or redact the materials that relate to that specific investigation of that specific person. And even then, there are more conditions coming up in the act. Sit tight. I told you these guys knew what they were doing. I want you to remember this language, narrowly tailored and temporary. That, by the way, means they can't withhold it forever. Okay, hold on. D, we're still in the list. They can withhold the following. That's where we are, okay? Documents, materials that depict or contain images of death, physical abuse, or injury to any person. Okay, so we're not going to get photographs, if they exist, of Jeffrey Epstein lying dead on the cell of his jail cell, okay, the floor of his jail cell. We're not going to get that. If there is evidence, photographic evidence, that Jeffrey Epstein did physical harm to any of these girls, photographs of bruises, God forbid, photographs of like a broken nose, God forbid, we're not going to see that, okay? That can be redacted, all right? E, final thing in the list of what they are allowed to redact. This is a place where a lot of people have also gotten confused. So I'm going to read it to you, and then there's also a backstop on this one. Sit tight. E, materials that contain information specifically authorized under criteria established by an executive order to be kept secret in the interest of national defense or foreign policy and are in fact, everybody listening, this is really important, and are in fact properly classified pursuant to executive order. All right. So I saw a very large commentator, someone who shall remain nameless, who I never follow because he's totally unreliable, but a very big name commentator, okay, write a whole piece on his Substack yesterday. This is why, you have to wonder, do people actually read about the claiming that Trump could declare all of the Epstein files as relevant to national security and foreign policy and would therefore be able to prevent them from being released. False. Absolutely false. Prohibited by the act. Okay? Only documents, let me read this again because this is really important. Only documents that contain information specifically authorized, that word is important, specifically authorized, okay? They have to be specifically named under criteria established by an executive order to be kept secret in the interest of national defense or foreign policy and are in fact properly classified. Okay, so that means this. That means hypothetically, I'm going to give you an example. Jeffrey Epstein had a conversation with the Joint Chiefs of Staff about whether or not to launch a nuclear weapon against Iran. Presumably, conversation by the Joint Chiefs of Staff about whether to launch a nuclear assault against Iran would feasibly fall within the purview of something that in the interest of national defense and foreign policy should not be disclosed, okay? That I could see. If it's a conversation between Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump about whether or not Donald Trump has had sex with some of Jeffrey Epstein's teenage victims, that is not properly classified. No matter what Donald Trump does, in accordance with material that should be protected due to national defense and foreign policy. So the idea, right, again, this is why the language of these things matters so much, that it is properly classified is a backstop to him, and there's more in here, we're still not done, a backstop to him being able to claim that all of the Epstein files relate to national security and foreign policy. Bullshit. Can't do it. Not allowed. All right? And we're going to talk about enforcement for a minute because yesterday, in a minute, because yesterday when I started talking about this on Blue Sky, there were people who were like, who's going to enforce it? Well, we're getting to that. Okay. Once I've proven you wrong, that they can't actually withhold everything and that they can't actually declare everything to be highly classified, then the thing that the naysayers fall back on was they're just going to ignore it. Hold on. We're getting to that in a minute. And I am being glib because I got really pissed off about this last night. This is one reason why you have to actually listen to lawyers who know what they're talking about. All right. And not take your advice about how this is going to play out from a nameless anonymous account on social media. All right. Because I hope you're starting to understand how well drafted this was, how well written it was, how much forethought went into this legislation in anticipation of all the horrible things that Trump could do to try to keep this material coming out. All right. Okay. Now we get to the fun part. Okay. Let's just say hypothetically, they decide they're going to try this bullshit anyway. They're going to redact things. They're just going to redact things randomly. They're going to try to redact everything, or they're going to redact huge chunks of information. Smart people on the Hill thought about this. Section 2. All redactions, let me repeat that, all redactions must be accompanied by a written justification published in the Federal Register and submitted to Congress. So every single thing that they choose to redact, they have to provide a written justification for that is published in the Federal Register and is submitted to Congress. Every single one. Okay, I want you to think, by the way, start thinking now about the effort that it will take to comply with this law if the DOJ decides to fuck around. Okay? Because if they say, we're going to redact, I don't know, 100,000 documents, they're going to have to write a log that contains a justification for all 100,000 of those redactions and submit it to Congress. Okay. I talked yesterday and the day before a bit about the nature of privilege logs in civil litigation and how this is similar to what you have to do in civil litigation when you are redacting materials as, highly confidential business records and things like that, or containing personal information. It's not an easy job. I've done privilege logs in multi-million-dollar litigation. Back when I was a junior lawyer, I did this. We're talking months of work can go into this, and they don't have that time. They have 30 days from the minute he signs it. 30 days. Okay. All right. Next part. This relates to classified information, and this is really important also. Again, very well thought out. To the extent that any covered information would otherwise be redacted or withheld as classified information under this section, wait for it, the Attorney General shall declassify, I love this part, that classified information to the maximum extent possible. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that if there is a highly classified document that contains a reference, let's just say hypothetically, to the sale of a nuclear weapon, let's just call it that because we've used that as an example before, they can keep classified that transaction, but they can't withhold the whole document. Okay? She is required by this act to declassify everything that she can to the maximum extent possible and disclose that information to the public. All right. And there's a subsection to this. Here we are, subsection A. If the Attorney General makes a determination that covered information may not be declassified and made available in a manner that protects the national security of the United States, including methods or sources related to national security, like let's just say Jeffrey Epstein was a spy working for the CIA, the Attorney General has to do something else. This is how well thought out this was. The Attorney General shall, ready for this? Not can, not maybe, shall, again, very important language from a lawyer's perspective, release an unclassified summary for each redacted or withheld classified information. Okay, so here's how this goes in a log. Jeffrey Epstein is a secret agent working for the CIA. Like, we're just having some fun today with speculation. But let's just say hypothetically that's that, okay? This is the excuse. Jeffrey Epstein was conveying highly classified information about, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, because he was in bed with the Saudis all the time, to the CIA, okay? And there's a document that goes through like all this stuff, right? And Pam Bondi's like, yeah, I'm going to withhold that entire document under the basis that it concerns methods or sources related to national security. She still has to write a summary of what is being withheld, maybe a summary that says something like, this document concerns methods and sources of information concerning nuclear facilities that were conveyed to the CIA by a secret source. She has to submit that. She has to write that for every piece of redacted information, not in bulk, every one, to the general public. She has to release a summary of what she has withheld to the general public. All right. Last one here on declassification or classification. 4. All decisions to classify any covered information after July 1, 2025. Here's why that matters, okay? You may be saying to yourself, why July 1st, 2025? So early July, like I think it was July 7th, was when Pam Bondi came forward and claimed that the Epstein Files didn't exist, okay? And so what they are suggesting here is that the Attorney General or someone inside the DOJ or the FBI or at the instructions of Donald Trump classified the entire Epstein Files, okay? Let's just say hypothetically they did that. All decisions to classify any covered information after July 1, 2025, all decisions, we decided, here's all the documents that prove it, that we were going to classify all of these Epstein Files, like in anticipation of the fact that we might be required to produce them someday and we want to hide them. All decisions after July 1st, 2025 shall be published in the Federal Register and submitted to Congress, including the date of the classification, the identity of the classifying authority who did it, CIA, FBI, which entity, which person, was it decided by Tulsi Gabbard, and an unclassified summary of the justification. So if they tried to classify all this stuff, they're going to have to submit a record that says, this was when the decision was made to classify it, this was who made the decision, and here's a summary that justifies why the decision was made for every single instance, all right? Again, when I told you this was brilliant, I wasn't lying. Okay, Section 3, report to Congress. More backstops coming, hold on. Within 15 days of completion of the release required under Section 2. Okay, so remember, bill gets signed, they have 30 days to disclose all this stuff to the general public and to Congress. Okay, so that's where the clock ticks. Trump signs it today, 30 days from today, the documents have to be released, all right? 15 days after that, so 45 days from the day he signs it, the Attorney General shall submit to the House and Senate committees on the judiciary, notably investigatory bodies, okay? They have oversight responsibility. A report listing, and then we have another list. Here's what the list is. So they have to submit within 45 days of the bill being signed, 15 days after they've complied with the disclosure requirements, the following: a report that lists, 1, all categories released and withheld. So they have to list a category of documents. We released 1 million pages of emails and we withheld 20,000, okay? Here we go, more backstops. Everybody paying attention? This is also what has to be included in the report. 2, a summary of the redactions made, including a legal basis. So again, for every single redaction they made, within 45 days of the act being entered into law, they have to provide a summary of the redactions made, including the legal basis for every redaction. All right? Last paragraph. We're almost done, you guys. 3, this is again one of my favorite parts of this, final clause of the act, all right? In this report, it has to include the following: a list of all government officials and politically exposed persons named or referenced in the released materials with no redactions permitted under subsection B1. That's the one that says you can't withhold any documents on the basis of like political or personal impact, all right? That's it. That's it. So I hope everybody understands now that if someone is out there saying to you, they can create a sham investigation and pull back all the Epstein files, that's false, okay? So let's talk now about enforcement, because again, like I said, we have the snarky cynics and naysayers and doom seekers among us who are like, they just ignore the law. Like, yes, the bill's brilliantly written. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the wonderful line-by-line explanation, but who cares? Because Trump's just going to ignore it. All right, this too has already been anticipated by the Democrats. In fact, Robert Garcia, who you all know, I love him. I have followed him. We've spoken on social media. I've followed him since he was the mayor of Long Beach. He's a brilliant politician. He's currently the minority leader of House Oversight. He gave an interview last night where he basically said, we don't know how this is going to go, right? Like, they could withhold chunks of things claiming that they're subject to an ongoing investigation, or they could try something crazy, which isn't permitted under the act, and withhold all the documents. So what happens next? What happens next is litigation, all right? But don't just sit with me there, because I can already hear like the cynics going like, oh yeah, and then it's going to go to the Supreme Court and Trump's just going to get everything that he wants. Okay. Understand this, okay? These decisions about how to enforce this act are going to start in federal court, and they would be injunctive relief, okay? So here's what that would look like. DOJ does something crazy, says we're not releasing any of the Epstein files because of a sham they're not going to put it that way, but ongoing investigation into Bill Clinton and all the Democrats who are affiliated with Jeffrey Epstein. Can't have any documents, sorry. Okay, the next thing that would happen from a legal standpoint, put a pin in it because we're going to talk about the political implications of this in a minute, is that a body of Congress, a congressman, one of the judiciary committees, and I'm going to remind you here now because this is really important, unanimous but one in the House, unanimous entirely in the Senate. No objections to this report. Okay, none. No, to this bill rather, none. Okay, one of the committees will file to enforce the act. Okay, and that means that they will file a complaint in federal court, probably in the district court for the District of Columbia, to enforce the bill. And what they will seek in that is what's called injunctive relief. Those of you who have been here for a while know that there are two kinds of relief you can get in civil litigation. One is injunctive, where you are seeking to get somebody to act or to stop acting in some way. The other one is damages. That's money, right? Here, they would be seeking injunctive relief. And what they would be seeking is an attempt to get the DOJ to comply, all right? And this is where things get really interesting, because if they are forced to go to court to do this, the judge can seek evidence about what it is that they're withholding. And if the injunctive complaint is drafted in the way that it will be, because as you can tell, they have great lawyers working for them, right? They will seek to have the judge review all of the materials that are being withheld in camera. That means, what in camera means is that the judge reviews them privately. The parties are not involved. The judge reviews the documents with her clerks, his clerks, their clerks in the chambers to determine if the redactions were properly taken, okay? And that means that those documents that are being withheld, which by the way, I'm going to remind you all, are not in paper format, cannot be shredded, cannot be whiteouted, cannot be magic markered, are maintained on hundreds of servers and backup tapes around the country, cannot be wholesale erased. They've probably been downloaded onto 1,000 DOJ laptops at this point. Those files will have to be disclosed to the judge, and the judge will make a determination about whether or not those materials were properly redacted, okay? And will then enforce the act and force disclosure. Now, if Trump does his thing of like, oh, I'm going to take this up to the appeals court, one of the things that you need to understand about this is that a case like this is one that's going to be like heavily weighted toward judicial discretion. What that ordinarily means is the trial court judge who sees the evidence, who takes witness testimony, right, who investigates something like this in the scenario that we're discussing, right, will have greater discretion in the form of appellate review, meaning that like the judge's decisions will get greater weight than what the appellate judges may decide, okay? And again, there are standards of review on appeal. There's something called de novo, which is where like the appellate court reviews everything all at once, like everything that was reviewed in the trial court. And then there's other standards of review that give greater discretion to the trial court judge. Because of a situation here where a trial court judge would actually be reviewing the Epstein files, that discretion would go to the trial court judge, okay? And I'm just going to tell you right now, yes, we have some bad Trumpy judges on the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, which would be the appellate court to hear this if the case was initially brought in DC District Court. Nonetheless, those judges are not going to want to review the totality of the Epstein files themselves, line by line, if the judge has gone through them with a fine-tooth comb and said, actually, you have to release everything except these 20,000 pages. Now, how could they challenge this in other forums? Well, I'm going to tell you something. Unanimous vote. Everybody but Clay Higgins. Executed by Donald Trump. They're not going to have an argument that it's unconstitutional. They're not going to have an argument that it's like overbroad, right? Because if it was overbroad, Trump would veto it. If it was overbroad, we wouldn't have a unanimous vote, okay? There's going to be a lot of arguments to be made in federal court about the fact that everybody wanted this. Everybody agreed on the language. There's nothing in it that is inherently violative of the federal Constitution. Okay. So again, I just want to like remind everybody, you have to understand how these things work, right? I don't see any legal basis. If this is like, agreed to by all but one of the House of Representatives, unanimously agreed to by the Senate, signed into law by Donald Trump, I don't see any basis on which the Supreme Court could possibly get involved in this. There's not a pressing federal question about whether or not the Epstein files should be released. There's no potential constitutional clause implicated, nothing related to the Fifth Amendment. I mean, like nothing related to an unlawful search and seizure under the Fourth. There's no constitutional basis to challenge this. So the idea that somehow this is going to get to SCOTUS, and I mean, like never say never, strange things happen sometimes, but seriously, there's no obvious basis if it is agreed to by all but one of the members of the House, the entire Senate, and Trump signs it into law, for this to be challenged in federal court as unconstitutional. So I think they're kind of shit out of luck if they end up in federal court, in other words. All right. And that's actually like really good news, because what it means is that they're going to comply somehow. Now, are they going to comply completely? I guess we're going to see. I'm a little suspicious about that. Right. But remember, every single redaction, every single thing that they withhold has to be documented and provided to the general public and to Congress. Every single thing. They block out somebody's name, they've got to justify it. So once again, I do just want to remind everybody, great lawyers wrote this. This was not done like haphazardly. This was written by people who really anticipated every awful thing that Trump and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and Trump's lackeys could do to these files. And there are protections built into it, as you all can tell now, multiple layers of protection that will prevent the administration from actually doing all the things that all the naysayers on social media are running around saying they can do. All right. So that's the really good news. And now if he signs it, we have 30 days. It's going to make for a very interesting Christmas, is all I'm going to say about that. We all might be getting like a really interesting Christmas present. And, the lawyers like myself are going to be diving into this stuff like nonstop. Okay. I have to talk about a couple of other questions here that related to the Epstein files that were raised. Somebody asked a question on the Patreon feed. Reminder, if you like what I'm doing here today, please subscribe to this channel. Give me a thumbs up. And if you care to support this broadcast, which is not my day job, like I'm not doing this as like my profession. I'm not like a full-time YouTuber or anything like that. Like I have a job in a company I run. Please consider becoming a supporter over on Patreon, where you get to ask me questions before every broadcast. Starts at $5 a month. You can get a discount on an annual subscription now for 20% off using the code FALL2025. Okay. Today on the Patreon broadcast, a Patreon feed rather, where we put up a question feed every morning, somebody asked me, like, is this going to lead to live questioning? Because there have been questions about whether or not Epstein's victims will be brought to testify on the Hill. Okay, that's a separate thing from the disclosure of the Epstein files. Now, let's just say hypothetically that the files are released and they reveal that Donald Trump raped multiple victims whose names are publicly known and who have already come forward. All right. Like hypothetically, there's a conversation between Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump that says, hey, you clearly had fun with those 3 girls this past weekend. That doesn't contain any child sexual abuse material, doesn't reference any names. That's something that's going to be publicly disclosed under this act. All right. If, for instance, we have victims who are like, I haven't come forward before now, but I'm one of those girls, and I want to testify before a congressional committee about what he did to me, then yes, we will have hearings. And in fact, one of the things I want people to remember here is that the general public is not, I skipped that part. Let me go back to that. The general public is not powerless in this. So I said to all of you that we were going to talk about the judicial and the legal enforcement proceedings first, and then the political implications. So let me circle back to that really quick. I have to remind everybody, and Thomas Massie said this yesterday. I don't agree with Thomas Massie on anything, okay? But I agree with him on this, all right? Here's the deal. Thomas Massie said yesterday that the outcry over the Epstein files is so extreme in the general public that the public will not be satisfied with anything other than a complete release, okay? And so if they do choose to fuck around with the files, and and we have Congress over here going through the whole federal court procedure, please don't forget that we all have a role to play in relation to how this all plays out, okay? Part of the reason why the House GOP was under so much pressure, why Donald Trump finally said, fine, vote for it, was because the lines were being flooded, including by the MAGA base, with demands for the files to be released, okay? Just in the same way that for the last 5 days before yesterday, I told everybody in this audience over and over again, you have to call your senators, because the place where this could die if it passes the House is the Senate. If they try to mess around with these files, if they say, oh, we don't have everything or anything, or everything's classified, or everything's subject to an ongoing investigation, we have a role to play in what happens next, right? You get to call your representatives and your senators and make your voice heard. You can show up to protest on the sidewalk in front of the local office for your representative and tell them what you think, okay? Again, I have to remind everybody that we are not powerless in this, that in fact, the whole reason why we got here to this moment of this act being passed is because the general public did not let it go, right? Again, July was when Bondi claimed these files didn't exist. We are sitting here now on the 19th of November. When has anything like this stuck to Donald Trump in his entire adult life? That's because of us, of people like us, okay? So don't forget that even if they fuck around, that's not the end of the story. It's not the end of the story legally, and it's not the end of the story politically. Okay. As for live questioning, we could have a role in whether ongoing investigations take place on the Hill, because if there's information that comes to light that's new, and the capacity and interest in the general public to actually hear from those women, those people, by the way, there are also indications there are young boys and men involved in this, because I just want to point out this morning I saw a video on this, someone who was victimized by the man who ran Abercrombie and Fitch. For those of you who don't know, the head of Abercrombie and Fitch, much like Lex Wexner, who ran Victoria's Secret, had his own child sex trafficking operation involving boys and young men, all right? And he was funded, just like Jeffrey Epstein, by Lex Wexner, all right? So I do not want to neglect like the men and young boys who are also potentially victims of this entire sex trafficking operation. All that said, if there's an interest in the general public in hearing more about this, in hearing testimony, then the committees involved can absolutely hold it. House Oversight could hold it. House Judiciary could hold it. Senate Judiciary could hold it, right? Any number of committees could take testimony on this, right? The committees on interstate commerce, if there's sex trafficking across state lines, could hear it, okay? So again, the files are also not the end of the story, all right? Okay, I already talked about copies and storage. We handled that already. Johnson was mad yesterday. Just so everybody's clear on this, now that we've been through the whole damn thing, there go my notes. Johnson was mad yesterday because he was really upset about the fact that people's names were going to be disclosed. He also lied to the general public, claiming that he was concerned about the victims' identities being disclosed, when the act, as you now know, already provides for their protection. So he was lying to the general public when he said, oh, we have to protect the identities and the safety of the victims. That's already in the act. What he was more worried about was innocent men, as he kind of framed it, innocent people having their names disclosed as being allies and friends and enablers and, people who looked the other way or maybe didn't of Jeffrey Epstein. That's what he was really worried about. And if you saw the interview with him right after it passed the Senate on unanimous consent, he was very upset. Like, usually Johnson is like kind of unshakable. I haven't seen it. I haven't heard it. He's like the monkeys, right? Yesterday, he was really upset because he had said to John Thune, you've got to fix this thing before it goes to the president's desk. And that didn't happen because he's worried about somebody's name coming up in all of this, all right? So that's what that was all about, just so everybody knows. All right, Final thing I have to talk about is redistricting, because we had some other amazing news yesterday that totally got lost in the framework of all of this. Please stay with me for another couple of minutes. This is a really long broadcast today. The Texas maps, the maps that were redistricted for the sake of trying to pick up 5 or 6 House seats and win the House of Representatives next year, were thrown out by a federal court yesterday in Texas. The court ordered that they have to use the 2021 maps now. Okay, now, listen up, because one of the questions on the Patreon feed this morning was, well, what does this mean for Texas and Illinois and Virginia and all the other states, or California, Illinois and Virginia, New York, all the other states who have considered doing this? Well, it depends, okay? Unlike in Texas, California passed a ballot initiative on this just 2 weeks ago, right? That allows California to redistrict mid-cycle that voters approved, okay? And, you know, the basis, by the way, for the districts being thrown, there were several, but the primary basis for the districts being thrown out in Texas was that they were racist, all right? What we have going on in California is a redistricting of a different sort. And it is a redistricting that is being done with the permission of the voting public, all right? So, ha, 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 ha. Let's have a couple laughs about this today. This entire situation of the Republicans trying to redistrict red states so that they could pick up seats in the House may now backfire on them royally. Because, and this is one possibility, I'm not saying this is guaranteed. One possibility here is that California redistricts anyway, and Texas can't, okay? Or Virginia redistricts anyway, and Texas or Indiana can't, all right? So things are cracking in the foundation of MAGA, and that's like really good news for all of us today. And, you know, I really hope that if you see people on social media claiming that like they're going to hide everything, they can get away with it, they can designate everything as classified, or they can somehow tag everything as, you know, like subject to an ongoing investigation, disclose nothing, please share this video with them. Because I really want people to understand this. Like, I'm not here for clicks. I'm here so people get it. Because a part of this is that when we're in despair and when we're feeling cynical, we don't actually get up and do the work of changing the country for good, right? If we think it's hopeless, we're less likely to actually get out there and do the work, okay? So it's really important that people understand like exactly what this phenomenal law does, right? Exactly how well it was written and what it does and does not permit, okay? So please make sure that you educate others about what's going on. And of course, like and share this broadcast. If this was meaningful to you, I would greatly appreciate your subscription over on Patreon. Thanks to everybody, by the way, who's already kicked me a tip here on YouTube. I saw you guys going by as we were doing this. Helps me support my kids as a single mother, pay my team behind the scenes that handles all my tech for this, and also pay me for the time away from my day job. So thank you all so much, everybody, for being here. I hope this was really helpful. And I'll look forward to seeing you all back here tomorrow at regular time for what will doubtless be a much shorter broadcast. All right, my friends, enjoy the rest of your day. Bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.